The scene opens not with shouting, not with chaos, but with a silence so thick it almost hums. Imagine a courtroom where every seat is filled, where every eye is fixed forward, and where one simple exchange has the power to shake the very foundation of how people perceive law, truth, and authority. On one side, you have Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, long known for his sharp critiques, his commanding presence, and his ability to turn a single sentence into a loaded challenge. On the other side sits Representative Jasmine Crockett, an attorney, legislator, and advocate who has made a career out of meeting challenges head-on, armed not with bluster, but with facts and precision. It was here that Thomas taunted Crockett's legal skills, perhaps expecting a stumble, a hesitation, or at least a flustered retreat. Instead, what followed left him, and many watching, speechless. Why does this moment matter? Because it's more than just a heated exchange. It's a story about power perception and the underestimated strength of preparation. It's about what happens when someone thought to be less experienced steps into the ring with someone considered untouchable. And most importantly, it's a reminder for all of us that truth, when delivered clearly, can disarm even the sharpest of critics. Think of this like a chess match. One player has been seated at the board for decades, moving pieces with confidence and expecting opponents to fall in line. The other player, newer but deeply studied, sees the board differently. When the expected taunt comes akin to a baited move designed to force a mistake, the reply doesn't just counter. It changes the rhythm of the game entirely. Why this story matters beyond the courtroom. This isn't just about Clarence Thomas and Jasmine Crockett. Their exchange is a mirror reflecting bigger dynamics we see every day. How many times have you witnessed someone with authority or seniority dismiss someone younger, newer, or less experienced? In classrooms, boardrooms, or family tables, we've all seen moments where confidence tries to outmuscle clarity. That's why this story resonates. It's not only about law or politics, it's about life. Crockett's fierce reply was more than words. It was an example of how preparation and courage can shift a conversation. And that's a lesson we all need, especially in an era where misinformation often shouts louder than truth. To borrow another analogy, think of this exchange like a courtroom drama colliding with a boxing match. Thomas threw the first jab expecting the opponent to duck. Instead, Crockett planted her feet, studied her target, and threw a punch so precise it stunned the room. The drama wasn't in the noise, it was in the silence that followed. The hook for you, the audience. So here's the promise. As we walk through this story, you're going to see exactly how Crockett turned a moment designed to belittle her into one that redefined the conversation. You'll learn not just what she said, but how she said it, and why it worked. You'll see how facts, when wielded with confidence, can pierce through taunts and theatrics. But more than that, you'll leave this story with tools you can use. Because this isn't just a spectacle to watch from afar. This is a guide, a playbook for how to handle your own moments of being underestimated. Whether in debates, discussions, or daily conversations, custom, quote. As we dive deeper, keep this thought at the center of your mind. In a world full of confident fiction, it only takes one person with facts to change everything. That's what Jasmine Crockett did in this moment. And that's what you can do when your moment comes, setting the stage for what's next. This is just the opening scene. From here we'll explore the build-up, the tension, the expectations, and the weight of narratives that set the stage for this defining confrontation. Think of it as the rising action in a play. The lights are dimming. The characters are taking their places, and the audience, us, is about to witness a moment that feels almost scripted. Except it's real. Because sometimes the most dramatic stories aren't written for TV or film. Sometimes they unfold in real time, before our very eyes. And sometimes the person expected to stay silent turns out to be the one who changes the story entirely. When stories like this unfold, they never happen in isolation. Moments where power is challenged, where rhetoric collides with fact, are the result of tension building quietly and steadily, long before the main event begins. to truly appreciate how Jasmine Crockett left Justice Clarence Thomas speechless. We need to rewind and understand the atmosphere, the undercurrents that made this exchange inevitable, the weight of authority. For decades, Clarence Thomas has been a towering figure on the Supreme Court. His presence carries authority not only because of his tenure, but also because of his reputation for sharp, biting remarks. Whether in legal reasoning or in off-the-cuff comments, Thomas has been known to put challengers on the defensive, almost daring them to question his stance. This reputation creates an environment where many avoid confrontation altogether. After all, who wants to challenge a sitting justice? That's the kind of authority that intimidates by default. It's the kind of authority that doesn't need to raise its voice. The name alone does the work. For Jasmine Crockett, stepping into this space meant more than just being prepared. It meant facing a figure who had already been framed in the public mind as nearly untouchable. Crockett's growing reputation. But here's the flip side. Jasmine Crockett wasn't stepping into this moment empty-handed. By the time this confrontation unfolded, Crockett had already built a reputation of her own, known for her legal expertise and her fiery, uncompromising style in congressional hearings. She had shown time and again that she wasn't easily intimidated. Where others tiptoed, Crockett charged. Where others hedged their RDS. She was precise and fearless. For her, being underestimated was familiar ground, and she had learned to turn it into an advantage. This reputation created its own tension. Observers wondered what would happen if a figure like Crockett crossed paths with someone like Thomas. Would her defiance crumble under the justice's authority, or would she rise to the occasion? The narratives at play. To understand the full scope, it's important to recognize the narratives at play. The institution versus challenger narrative. Thomas, representing the entrenched institution of the Supreme Court, with all its history and gravitas. Crockett representing a fresh, unflinching voice, unwilling to bow to hierarchy for its own sake. The experience versus energy narrative. Thomas, decades into a career defined by conservative jurisprudence. Crockett, newer on the national stage with sharp energy and unrelenting confidence. The taunt versus truth narrative. A dismissive remark about Crockett's legal skills. Her reply grounded not in emotion, but in preparation and fact. Each of these threads set the stage for a dramatic collision. The expectations weren't neutral. They were charged, pulling the audience toward one burning question: who would prevail when they finally clashed? The public's anticipation. By this point, the public had already come to expect fireworks whenever Crockett entered a contentious space. Clips of her fiery takedowns had gone viral before. On the other hand, Clarence Thomas remained a lightning rod for criticism and fascination alike. The thought of the two colliding was enough to spark conversations long before it even happened. Commentators speculated, would Crockett back down in deference to a justice? Would Thomas deliver one of his trademark stinging remarks and leave her fumbling? Or would something different unfold? This speculation wasn't idle chatter. It reflected a larger cultural divide between those who belie authority should be respected without question, and those who argue that authority must always be tested by truth. The common mistakes. Before the moment. And here's where it gets even more interesting. In settings like this, there are common mistakes people make when confronted with authority. They confuse confidence with correctness. Just because someone speaks with conviction doesn't mean they're right. They react emotionally instead of strategically. Taunts are designed to provoke. Responding in anger often hands the advantage to the taunter. They underestimate preparation. The loudest voice in the room often drowns out unprepared ones. But when facts are ready, even volume can't compete. Crockett, however, had a different approach. She had studied these dynamics and knew how to flip them. Instead of reacting emotionally, she waited. Instead of being cowed by confidence, she leaned on preparation. Instead of shrinking in the shadow of authority, she used it as a backdrop against which her clarity could shine brighter. Media expectations. As the moment approached, the media was primed. Journalists and commentators thrive on clashes between big personalities, and this was one of those rare scenarios where both sides had reputations for leaving a mark. For the press, the buildup wasn't just about a legal exchange, it was about drama. Would this be another instance of Thomas reminding everyone why he's considered untouchable? Or would it be Crockett's chance to prove yet again that she's not afraid to meet power with precision? This anticipation amplified the tension. Every headline, every social media post, every whispered conversation in political circles added weight to the stage. Before the first word was even spoken, a charged atmosphere. By the time Crockett and Thomas faced each other, the atmosphere was electric. Imagine the quiet buzz of a room filled with people who know something significant is about to happen. Imagine the tension in the air as cameras roll, pens hover over notepads, and every glance FTS forward. This wasn't just about two individuals. It was about the larger story unfolding of how truth holds up against authority, of how preparation confronts power. And then it happened. The taunt. Simple, sharp, designed to belittle. A challenge thrown not just at Crockett, but at the very idea that someone like her could stand on equal footing with a justice. The room shifted. Some smirked, expecting her to falter. Others leaned in, waiting for the reply. And in that moment, the tension that had been building for weeks, even months, reached its breaking point. Transition to the confrontation. This is the beauty of storytelling. When the buildup is this intense, the payoff has to match it. And in this case it did. Because Crockett didn't just reply, she flipped the script. She turned the taunt into an opening, the dismissal into an opportunity, and in doing so, she left Thomas, and many others, speechless. The buildup was over. The confrontation had begun. The stage had been set. The atmosphere was charged. All the tension, speculation, and quiet anticipation finally funneled into a single exchange. Clarence Thomas's taunt aimed at Jasmine Crockett and her fierce, unforgettable reply. This wasn't just a clash of words. It was a clash of worlds. Authority versus defiance. Longevity versus rising power. A test of whether fact could pierce through the weight of reputation. The taunt. It began simply, almost casually. Clarence Thomas, with his trademark composure, leaned on the gravitas that had defined his decades-long career. His tone wasn't raised, it didn't need to be. With a faint smirk, he delivered the jab. Congresswoman Crockett, perhaps the finer points of law escape you. Not everyone is cut out for the rigors of constitutional interpretation. It was sharp. It was dismissive. It wasn't just a critique of her argument. It was a dismissal of her very skill set as a lawyer, as though she were playing out of her league. Words landed heavily. Some in the room stifled grins, expecting Crockett to fumble. Others braced for awkward silence. Cameras zoomed in, eager to capture what looked like the makings of a one-sided exchange. Crockett's composure. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't dart. Her hands didn't fumble with papers. Instead, she leaned back slightly, a deliberate gesture that conveyed calm rather than defensiveness. She let the silence breathe for a moment, long enough for Thomas's words to hang in the air, long enough for the audience to wonder if she'd retreat. And then she began. The opening move, Justice Thomas. She said, her tone steady. With all due respect, I've spent years practicing constitutional law in courtrooms where outcomes weren't predetermined by ideology. I didn't just study the Constitution. I fought for it, case by case, client by client. Perhaps the difference is that I've seen how these principles play out in real lives, not just in abstract theory. The room stirred. Her words weren't just a defense. They were a pivot. She had reframed his taunt, shifting the conversation from her supposed lack of skill to her lived experience with the law. In a single sentence, she had turned the tables from theory to practice, from dismissal to depth, the counterstrike. But Crockett didn't stop there. She pressed forward, each word sharper than the last. You see, the strength of a legal mind isn't measured by how many years it's sat on a bench. It's measured by whether it can stand firm when people's rights are on the line. And I can assure you, Justice, that when my constituents' freedoms are threatened, I don't just interpret the Constitution. I defend it. Gasps rippled through the room. This wasn't just a reply. It was a counterstrike, measured, factual, and laced with enough force to leave even seasoned observers stunned. Thomas's reaction. For a brief moment, Clarence Thomas didn't respond. His eyes narrowed. His lips tightened. The silence was telling. This was a man not used to being challenged so directly, especially by someone he had just attempted to dismiss. And yet the silence said more than words could. Crockett had landed her punch. The weight of authority that Thomas had wielded moments earlier seemed, if only briefly, diminished. The play-by-play of power. What made this moment so powerful wasn't just the words themselves. It was the rhythm of the exchange, the taunt delivered with quiet authority, designed to belittle. The pause. Crockett. Let the silence work for her, building suspense. The reply. Calm, measured, grounded in fact and experience. The counterstrike. A pivot that turned defense into offense. The silence. Thomas's lack of immediate comeback underscored the impact. This was more than a confrontation. It was a masterclass in rhetorical strategy. The room's response. The observers in the room reacted almost in waves. First, there was surprise, the kind of sharp intake of breath when someone does the unexpected. Then there was awe as Crockett's words sank in. By the time Thomas failed to immediately reply, the realization had set in. She hadn't just defended herself. She had seized control of the narrative. Journalists scribbled furiously. Cameras caught faces that ranged from stunned silence to subtle nods of approval. Even those who might not agree with Crockett's politics couldn't deny the effectiveness of her reply. Beyond the room. What happened inside that room didn't stay there for long. Almost immediately, clips of the exchange spread online. Headlines captured the drama. Crockett stuns. Thomas with fierce reply. Justice left speechless. Moment of truth in legal showdown. But it wasn't just about virality. People resonated with the exchange because it reflected a broader truth that authority isn't infallible, and that those who are underestimated can rise to the occasion in ways that rewrite the script entirely. Direct quotes that stuck. 3 lines from Crockett's reply echoed the loudest. I didn't just study the Constitution. I fought for it. The strength of a legal mind isn't measured by how many years it sat on a bench. When my constituents' freedoms are threatened, I don't just interpret the Constitution, I defend it. These weren't just sound bites. They were rallying cries, lines that people could repeat, share, and internalize. They distilled the essence of her reply into powerful, memorable phrases. The turning point. By the end of the confrontation, the dynamic in the room had shifted. What began as Thomas asserting his authority ended with Crockett owning the space authority had been challenged, and at least in that moment, rebalanced. The defining moment wasn't that Thomas taunted her. It wasn't even that. Crockett replied. It was that her reply carried enough weight to leave him without words. And that silence carried across the room, across the media, and across the public consciousness. Why it worked. Let's break down. Why Crockett's response landed so powerfully. She didn't react emotionally. By staying composed, she denied Thomas the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She reframed the narrative. Instead of accepting his framing, that she lacked skill, she shifted it to lived experience and real-world defense of rights. She elevated the stakes. By tying her response to defending her constituents, she made it about people, not just herself. She left no easy comeback. Thomas couldn't counter without seeming to dismiss real-world struggles, and so silence became his only option. This is why the moment mattered. It wasn't just a witty comeback. It was strategic, layered, and devastatingly effective. The cinematic finale picture. It like the final scene in a drama. The camera zooms in on Crockett as she finishes her statement, her voice unwavering. The room is silent. The justice, once confident, sits in stillness. And then the scene cuts. Not with more words, but with the resonance of silence. A silence that speaks louder than any rebuttal could. That silence wasn't emptiness. It was victory. The confrontation was over, but its impact was only beginning. What played out in that single electrifying moment between Justice Clarence Thomas and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett refused to stay contained within the four walls of that hearing room. The ripples spread outward almost instantly, touching journalists, political analysts, social media users, and ordinary citizens alike. This wasn't just an exchange of words. It was a spark that lit an immediate firestorm. Media scramble. Capturing the story. The first wave came from reporters who had witnessed the clash firsthand. Some had expected Thomas's taunt to leave Crockett scrambling, but what they got instead was the kind of reply that demanded front-page headlines. Within minutes, networks ran breaking news. Chiron's Justice Thomas. Stunned after Crockett's sharp reply. Rising star. Takes on judicial titan. Unflinching Crockett delivers scathing response. Cable news panels scrambled to replay the footage. Anchors leaned in, eyebrows raised as if to confirm with their audiences. Yes, you saw what we saw. This happened. What made the moment irresistible to the media was its clarity. No convoluted explanation was required. The exchange itself was raw, direct, and cinematic. The kind of soundbite-driven showdown that television producers dream of. Social media. The clip goes viral. If television elevated the exchange, social media immortalized it. Within hours, clips of Crockett's response circulated across platforms, amassing millions of views. On Twitter, X hashtags trended globally. Crockett vs. Thomas speechless, justice facts. Over fiction. TikTok users clipped Crockett's most powerful line. I didn't just study the Constitution. I fought for it, overlaying it with dramatic music and text effects. Instagram Reels added slow-motion edits of her delivery, transforming the moment into a pop culture event. The virality wasn't just about entertainment. It reflected how deeply her words resonated. For many, Crockett's reply became a symbol of standing tall against established power. For others, it was a reminder that truth spoken with clarity still carries weight in a noisy world. The public divide. Public reaction, however, was not monolithic. The confrontation drew strong opinions on both sides of the political spectrum. Supporters of Crockett hailed her as a rising figure who had the courage to speak truth to power. They flooded her social media with praise, calling her fearless, inspirational, and even the voice we need in this moment. Supporters of Thomas downplayed the moment as political theater, arguing that Crockett's words were carefully rehearsed and designed for the cameras. Some suggested that Thomas's silence wasn't shock, but restraint, a choice not to escalate. Yet even among critics, there was acknowledgement that Crockett had managed something unusual. She had forced a justice of the Supreme Court, a figure often viewed as untouchable in public forums, into a rare position of visible discomfort. Early consequences for both sides. The fallout wasn't limited to chatter. It carried tangible consequences. For Jasmine Crockett, increased visibility. Overnight, her profile rose sharply. Media outlets that had barely covered her before now sought her out for interviews. Fundraising boost reports indicated that donations to her campaign surged in the days following the exchange. Political momentum. Her colleagues, especially those on her side of the aisle, applauded her for holding her ground. Some privately remarked that she had just leveled up her political career. For Clarence Thomas, media scrutiny. His choice to taunt and then fall silent rekindled criticism about his temperament and impartiality. Narrative challenge. For years, Thomas had built his reputation on being deliberate and difficult to rattle. This moment poked a hole in that image, showing him caught off guard. Renewed controversies. The clash also reopened broader debates about his judicial philosophy and prior controversies, with commentators weaving Crockett's response into larger critiques. Analysts weigh in. Political commentators were quick to dissect the moment, each framing it through their own lens. On progressive outlets, the narrative was clear. Crockett had delivered a textbook example of how to challenge entrenched authority with facts and composure. On conservative platforms, commentators framed Thomas as choosing the higher ground, by not engaging further, suggesting that Crockett's performance was more about optics than substance. Yet across the board, there was agreement on one fact: the exchange mattered. It wasn't just another viral clip destined to fade within hours. It touched something deeper about authority, truth, and how power is contested in public spaces. The symbolism of the exchange. Why did this moment resonate so widely beyond the political class? Because it symbolized a generational and philosophical clash. Experience versus fresh perspective. Thomas represented decades of established judicial authority. Crockett represented a new voice, rooted in lived experience and unapologetic advocacy. Authority versus accountability. The taunt assumed deference. The reply rejected it. Silence versus speech. In the end, Thomas's silence was as powerful as Crockett's words. It underscored who had seized control of the narrative. For many viewers, the confrontation distilled into a universal story. What happens when someone underestimated refuses to back down? The conversation expands. In the days following the exchange, the fallout grew into something larger than Crockett or Thomas. Editorials debated the role of Supreme Court justices in public discourse. Should they engage in political-style sparring at all? Op-eds praised Crockett as a model for how public officials should respond to attacks, not with anger but with clarity and conviction. Panel discussions on networks turned the confrontation into a springboard for larger debates about the integrity of law, the role of women in politics, and the dangers of dismissive rhetoric in high-stakes environments. What had TED as a taunt turned into a national conversation about respect, authority, and the place of truth in political dialogue. The human side. Amid all the analysis, one element stood out: the human reaction. Ordinary people, those not deeply immersed in legal theory or partisan battles, saw something relatable in Crockett's stance. Workers spoke of how her response reminded them of standing up to dismissive bosses. Students said it gave them courage to defend their ideas in classrooms where they felt underestimated. Women in particular highlighted how Crockett's poise resonated with their own experiences of being talked down to in professional spaces. It was this relatability that transformed the moment from political news into cultural touchstone. The momentum builds. By the end of the first week, the aftermath was clear. Crockett's name recognition had skyrocketed. Thomas faced intensified scrutiny, and the story refused to die down. Each replay of the clip kept the confrontation alive, embedding it deeper into public consciousness. The fallout was no longer about who won the exchange. It was about what the exchange represented. Closing the section. A turning point. The immediate aftermath of Crockett and Thomas's confrontation proved one truth. Words spoken in a single moment can carry consequences far beyond the moment itself. What began as a taunt became a symbol. What seemed like a personal clash became a public reckoning. And the silence that followed Crockett's reply spoke louder than anything Thomas or anyone else in the room could have said. The ripple effects were already clear, but the deeper question lingered. What did this moment mean for democracy, for truth, and for the role of facts in the face of power? That answer, as the story would soon reveal, would carry implications far beyond one exchange. The confrontation and its immediate aftermath were gripping. But the true power of this moment wasn't just in the clash itself. It was in what it revealed about the times we're living in and what it means for the future of democracy. At first glance, it may have looked like a sharp-tongued exchange between a Supreme Court justice and a rising Congresswoman. But to stop there would be to miss the deeper lesson. What unfolded wasn't just a headline. It was a parable about truth, power, and preparation. Facts over rhetoric. When Clarence Thomas taunted Jasmine Crockett, he wasn't just testing her legal knowledge. He was invoking decades of judicial authority. His presence, his title, and his history carried weight. For some, that kind of authority can feel insurmountable. But Crockett's reply cut through all of that. Her response demonstrated something profound. When facts are on your side, rhetoric alone cannot prevail. In an era where half-truths, soundbites, and misdirection often dominate, she showed that preparation grounded in truth has the power to silence even the most intimidating opponent. It was a reminder that confident fiction, no matter how polished, cannot withstand the gravity of well-grounded fact. Preparation beats confidence. This moment also underscored a universal truth. Confidence without preparation is fragile. Thomas's taunt was delivered with the assurance of someone expecting his target to falter. But Crockett was ready. Her reply didn't just answer the challenge. It dismantled the premise of the taunt itself. Preparation gave her composure. Preparation gave her authority. Preparation turned her from a potential victim of dismissal into the undeniable victor of the exchange. For anyone watching, the lesson was clear. Confidence may get attention, but preparation wins. Respect, beyond politics, a symbol of resistance. But this was not just a lesson for politicians or lawyers. It resonated far more widely. Millions saw in Crockett's stance a reflection of their own struggles. Workers underestimated by bosses, students dismissed by professors. Women, particularly women of color, overlooked in professional spaces. Her reply became a symbol: the courage to resist, the readiness to defend yourself, and the power of not backing down when truth is on your side. This is why the moment lived beyond the headlines. It wasn't only about Crockett or Thomas. It was about everyone who has ever been told explicitly or implicitly that they weren't enough. Why this matters for democracy. At its core, the clash carried a lesson about democracy itself. Democracy isn't just a system of laws. It's a system that depends on truth, accountability, and courage. When authority goes unchecked, democracy weakens. When individuals rise to challenge power with facts, democracy strengthens. That is why this story matters so deeply. It was never only about a taunt or a reply. It was about the ongoing battle between power and accountability, between rhetoric and reality, between fiction and fact. And it gave us a vivid reminder of something too often forgotten. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. It survives only when ordinary people defend the truth. The emotional peak. This is where the story transcends politics. Because ultimately, the image of Clarence Thomas left speechless and Jasmine Crockett standing tall is about more than a single confrontation. It's about the endurance of truth in the face of power. It's about preparation, defeating arrogance. It's about courage, defeating dismissal. It's about one voice proving that even the most entrenched authority can be challenged. For those who watched, it wasn't just a clip to be shared. It was an invitation to believe again in the power of truth and to recognize that the defense of democracy doesn't happen in the abstract. It happens in moments exactly like this one. Closing the section. The climax of this story isn't that Thomas was silenced. It's that Crockett's words echoed louder than his title. That in itself is the victory and the lesson. Because if one exchange can remind millions that truth is stronger than power, then this story is more than political theater. It's a roadmap for how democracy survives. The confrontation between Justy C. Clarence Thomas and Jasmine Crockett was more than political drama. It was a mirror, reflecting struggles many of us face in our own lives. And that's where you come in. Because while this story may have played out on a national stage, its lessons don't stop there. They ripple outward, touching workplaces, classrooms, families, friendships, everywhere that power and truth collide, turning passive viewers into participants. Think about it. How many times have you found yourself in a situation where someone tried to diminish you, not because of what you knew, but because of who they thought you were? Maybe it was a boss who doubted your skills, a teacher who brushed aside your ideas, or even a friend who made a dismissive remark. What did you do? Did you respond? Did you stay quiet? Did you wish later that you had found the words to stand your ground? Jasmine Crockett's moment wasn't just about politics. It was about finding your voice in the face of intimidation. And here's the thing. You have that same power. Reflective questions for you. Let's pause and turn this inward. Have you ever been underestimated? And how did you respond? What would it take for you to meet confidence with preparation instead of backing down? When you see misinformation spread, online at work or even among family, do you challenge it or do you let it slide? These aren't abstract questions. They're real, and the way we answer them shapes the kind of culture we live in. The battle against misinformation. This is where the story intersects with something we all experience every day. Misinformation. We live in a world where bold claims often drown out quiet facts. A tweet or a soundbite can shape opinions before truth has time to catch up. That's not just a political issue. It's a daily reality. How often have you scrolled through social media and seen something blatantly false being shared? How often have you heard someone repeat a claim you know isn't true? It's tempting to stay silent. It's easier to avoid confrontation. But silence is what allows misinformation to spread unchecked. Crockett's example reminds us that the truth doesn't win by default. It wins when someone stands up to defend it. Why this story resonates with everyday life. At its core, the exchange between Thomas and Crockett was about more than legal skills. It was about dignity, resilience, and the courage to speak truth to power. And isn't that something we all crave? To know that when we're tested, whether in a courtroom, a boardroom, or even around the dinner table, we'll have the courage and preparation to hold our ground. That's why people shared this story, clipped it, debated it, replayed it. It wasn't just politics. It was personal. It was a reminder that authority doesn't always mean correctness, and that preparation can silence even the most confident taunts. Engaging the audience. And now I want to hear from you. What part of Crockett's response resonated most with you? Have you ever had a Crockett moment of your own, where preparation helped you win a battle you weren't expected to win? If not, what would it take for you to create one? Drop your answers in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Start a conversation about what it means to speak truth in your own community. Because these stories aren't meant to stay confined to headlines. They're meant to spark change in us. A shared responsibility. Let's be clear. Democracy isn't upheld by a few people on big stages. It's upheld by all of us in the choices we make every day. When we challenge misinformation. When we refuse to let dismissiveness silence us. When we choose truth over rhetoric. We're doing the very work that keeps democracy alive. Jasmine Crockett's story is just one chapter. The next chapter, that's yours, drawing the audience in. So the next time you find yourself facing a dismissive remark or a bold claim that isn't backed by fact, remember this moment. Remember how Crockett turned a taunt into a triumph. And then ask yourself, what will I do when my moment comes? Because your moment may not be on camera, but it will matter just the same. Closing the section. The confrontation may have left Clarence Thomas speechless, but its true power lies in what it inspires in you. This isn't just about watching history. It's about stepping into it. And here's the truth. Every single one of us has a role to play in defending fact over fiction, truth over taunts, democracy over dismissal. We've traveled through the tension, the confrontation, and the fallout of an extraordinary moment. Justice Clarence Thomas, taunting Jasmine Crockett. And Crockett's fierce, fearless reply that left him speechless. But let's pause and pull the lens back. What did we just witness? It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It wasn't just a headline designed to grab attention. It was a lesson, a powerful, unshakable reminder that facts will always outlast fiction. That preparation will always overpower arrogance, and that courage can silence even the loudest taunts. Restating the lesson, when Thomas tried to dismiss Crockett's skills, he wasn't just questioning her personally. He was testing the very idea that truth can stand against authority. And Crockett proved in real time that it can. That's the heart of this story. Authority doesn't guarantee correctness. Confidence isn't a substitute for preparation. Truth, when defended, can transform the entire conversation. And isn't that the exact reminder we need right now? In a world where misinformation spreads faster than facts, where loud voices often drown out steady ones, Crockett's response was more than a clapback. It was a call to all of us to value truth enough to defend it. Why you matter. Here's the part where you come in. This story isn't just for us to watch, it's for us to learn from. You don't need a law degree or a seat in Congress to make a difference. You don't need cameras or a microphone to defend truth. Every time you correct a falsehood, every time you prepare yourself to counter misinformation, every time you stand up when someone tries to dismiss or diminish you, you are doing the same work Jasmine Crockett did in that room. And let's be honest, democracy doesn't survive on autopilot. It survives because people like you decide that truth is worth fighting for. Call to action. So here's what I'm asking from you. Stay engaged. Don't just watch these moments. Talk about them. Share them. Let them inspire you to act in your own spaces. Prepare yourself. Knowledge is your armor. Facts are your tools. Don't let confidence without substance win the day. Defend the truth. Whether it's in your workplace, your classroom, your family, or your community, step up when misinformation spreads. And if this story resonated with you, if you found yourself inspired by Crockett's courage, then don't let it stop here. Subscribe, share, and stay connected. Because the more we build communities that defend truth, the stronger our democracy becomes. Closing line. I'll leave you with this thought. In the end, democracy doesn't defend itself. That's our job. The question is, will you be ready when your moment comes?